365 podcast explores the best practices and deep insights of modern-day Edisons, people who innovate 365 days of the year. This podcast is brought to you by Edison 365, the company that enables idea management from idea to business impact. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Edison 365 podcast. My name is Stuart Noyce, and I'm joined by my partner, Dennis Hull. Our guest today is Brant Cooper, CEO and founder of Moves the Needle, a global innovation consulting firm with deep roots in the lean startup movement. Brant, thank you very much for taking this interview with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, can you tell us, just start with how you came to start Moves the Needle.
Sure. So I lived through the dot-com boom and bust. So I was a startup guy up in the San Francisco Bay Area, worked at a number of startups, experienced IPO, acquisition, rapid growth that then tailed off, and also crushing failure. So number of different roles, from IT manager to running professional services to product management and running marketing and partnerships and all of that type of stuff. Served on executive teams, was a founder of a couple of the failures. Broad experience in the startup world. After the bust, there were a bunch of people that were talking, writing, in conversations around, why are we trying to make startups look like big businesses when the successful startups don't operate that way? So can we codify a bit what successful startups look like? How do they operate? And out of those conversations emerged some writing by Steve Blank and Eric Ries started talking about lean startup stuff. And I had launched my own marketing services called Sales and Marketing R&D, which was trying to bring the engineering rigor to the sales and marketing side of the house. And so there was a bunch of people talking about this stuff. And so I decided to write a book, self-published, Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development. First book that talked about customer development and lean startup and product market fit and all of these things that a lot of people were trying to wrap their arms around. Eric Ries's Lean Startup book then sort of blew that market open, and large enterprises were starting to take a look at this because, large enterprises launch products that nobody wants, and that's really expensive, more expensive than in the startup world. So I followed up with the New York Times bestseller, The Lean Entrepreneur, a real deep dive into how you develop customer empathy and run experiments and what metrics you should be looking at. And about that time, formed a company called Moves the Needle, partnered up with Aaron Eden, who was responsible for scaling these lean startup techniques, plus design thinking across Intuit. And Intuit has had a number of successes based upon these principles. So we decided to combine our efforts, take it to the enterprise. That was 2014, and off we were running.
Okay, so fast forward to today. What do you think is the big problem that you now address with Moves the Needle?
Yeah, so that's funny. Back in when all of this stuff was starting, we're saying this is just for scalable startups. That's our market, nobody else. This was back when I wrote the first book. When Eric Ries's book, was read by corporates, we're going like, okay, corporates can use this, but only for disruptive innovation. It's only for the real radical stuff. And man, you fast forward, 5-6 years from when we started the company, it's everybody inside the enterprise has to adopt what I now call as the entrepreneurial spirit. So basically, there's different ways to operate within uncertainty. And the bigger and the more successful the business that you're in, you're used to operating in execution mode. As a matter of fact, you hear that all the time, especially from, mentors and from investors. You just have to execute, go out and execute, that's for winners. But the thing is that if you execute in the face of uncertainty, what do? You fail. So really what it ends up being is that you need this balance between learning and executing. And you have to make sure that you're not executing on what you don't know, but on what you know. And that you have a different process for turning the unknown into the known. And so now what we do is we apply these techniques, this entrepreneurial spirit, this combination of design thinking and lean startup and agile anywhere inside the business that faces uncertainty. And so if you're trying to hit your numbers this year or next year, you're mostly in execution mode, but you might not know how you're going to hit all your numbers. And so that means there's uncertainty there. So you're balancing a lot of execution with a little bit of learning mode. If you're on the innovation team and you're supposed to be reinventing your business, that's going to take 5, 6, 7 years for that to come to fruition, then you're doing massive amount of learning and exploring and only smaller bits of execution. And so there's a continuum all across the business, and you have to learn how to balance those two things.
Yeah, so you really started to go into what the solution looks like that essentially Moves the Needle is offering here. It must be some combination of these methodologies and practices. Could you take us through what that looks like for a typical client?
Right. So again, we operate differently based upon whether we're on the mostly execution side versus the innovation side. We have a number of products. Basically, we run our version of sprints, design sprints. We call them lean innovation sprints. Inside those sprints, we're doing sort of a really rapid learning by doing. So we're applying it to real world projects. We're combining agile practices with empathy work and how to run disciplined experiments. We then can expand upon that and run accelerator programs for these companies. So those, even in the startup world, the 90-day cohort is sort of arbitrary, but we've dutifully followed that. So we run 90-day cohorts. We teach leaders how to act like investors. So we run growth boards or innovation boards. We're doing leadership workshops at the same time because they have to learn new skills. And so those are the primary things that we're doing. We'll build up an internal training program if you want. We can do some strategy work. We can do some portfolio management. But primarily, we're teaching people how to operate differently when they face uncertainty, and then how to balance that learning with the execution mode.
Yeah. So now, are most of these clients larger companies?
They're all large companies. We're only working with. So we've got some mid markets. We've probably done a couple of startupies that are have lots of investment. But primarily, we're working, with Fortune 500 or Global 1000 companies.
Right. And do they end up working with you for quite a while then? Are they, you establish a relationship and then that relationship lasts for several years? Or is this more of a one-off, hey, let's solve a quick problem and get out?
Yeah, it kind of depends on how deeply they buy into our story, right? So we've worked with companies that are fully bought into everybody needs to learn these principles and how to apply them. And those engagements last for years. We have some companies that are going, listen, we just, we want a sprint here. We want to kick off, teach us how to do this, and then we'll run with it. And maybe we do some follow-on coaching with them as they go through the process. And then we've got, everything in between where innovation groups or product teams want to infect the rest of the organization, but it just doesn't catch hold. The company's maybe not quite ready. Or perhaps they're using a different set of methodologies, and so we'll work with them for several months and then let them go on their merry way. So it varies quite a bit.
Sure. What makes you guys so special at Moves the Needle? I mean, what's your secret sauce, as it were?
Well, there's two things. I think that we demonstrate thought leadership. I think we're one step ahead of the competition in seeing why these principles need to be applied. I think that there's a lot of people out in the innovation world that talk about an ambidextrous company or a bimodal operating system. And in that view, basically you split the organization into, 95% just keep doing it the way you're doing it. And the other 5% is, okay, you guys are going to be the ones that operate differently. We see that that's a failure. The world has changed. This uncertainty pervades the whole organization. And so if you just leave your future to this innovation group that's operating in this search mode, and they're not going to see the ROI for 5, 6, 7 years, those companies aren't going to survive, or the program's not going to survive, because these companies are so desperate to figure out how they're going to find their growth in the next few years that bimodal system just fundamentally doesn't work. And so I think we're out in front in the thinking on that. I think the second thing is that when our DNA is this combination of design thinking and the lean startup experimentation plus the agile structure, which is really important in teaching these organizations how to run a team that's autonomous, tackling these problems. And I think that there's other companies, other consultants, other organizations that really their DNA is one of those three things. And then they start tacking on the other. And again, it's just not as effective because it's just not inside of them. They're just not bought in. They don't necessarily understand why you're doing, what you're doing when. And I think that the third and maybe the most important is our people. We have entrepreneurs. We have entrepreneurs that have also worked in large companies, and we have large company innovators that have come to work with us so that we have deep empathy, deep understanding for our corporate clients. We understand the issues that they're facing and how tough it is to get the change in behavior that's really required up and down the stack from the front lines to the C-suite. So I think that those were probably our three top reasons that we've been successful.
Yeah, excellent. What would you say your greatest accomplishment has been to date with Moves the Needle?
From a impact perspective, I think that one of the leading programs out there in the world is ING's Agile and Pace program. And basically, this is pretty radical what they're doing at ING. Basically, they are converting all of their business units into Agile in the sense that Spotify's engineering team does it. So no longer are they departments. They are chapters and guilds. I don't want to go too much into that, but it's really this built-in cross-functional Agile teams. And it's a bank that's doing this. So that's insane to me. It's so forward-thinking. And of course, we were deeply, deeply embedded in all levels at ING, helping them convert people into working this new way. And again, it's been from the front lines to the C-suite and from the near-term horizons of how we're going to apply this every day to how are we also going to apply this to reinventing banking. So I'm super proud of our effort there, and we're trying to bring that to other organizations as well.
Okay, so if that's for real, that's pretty world changing. I mean, if you can get a bank to think agile from within, that's pretty astonishing.
It is astonishing, and I don't want to take too much credit there. The leadership at ING decided to do this before they had ever heard of Moves the Needle, and there's a bunch of people inside of ING, some of whom have moved on now, that were influential, and there were other outside consultants. Boston Consulting Group, I think, was big in there, and some other outside influences for sure. So this was not invented by Moves the Needle and then executed by Moves the Needle. We were partnered with them as well as others to make this extraordinary step.
Large organizations, for them to change, they have to want to change. You can be there to help them, but they still have to want to do it, don't they?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. So what's up for you in the next 12 months? What's the objective now?
Well, I think that it's we just need to continue to eat our own dog food. To be honest, we have to figure out where in our funnel, our value stream funnel, do we need to improve our performance in order to keep growing, in order to bring this to more and more enterprises. So I think that we're in sort of quote unquote execution mode, but in our world, that means also a balancing of the learning and executing. So we are always running experiments inside of our organization to figure out, how do we stay ahead and how do we move faster and, how do we help more organizations?
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, you know what? You have done a bang-up job on this first section, and I am really excited about this interview. We're going to send it over to Dennis now. He has a few questions, and then when he's finished, he'll send it back to me, and we'll dig into lean process a little bit more.
Great.
Thank you, Stuart. Brant, I'm really curious about how you have experienced the role as an innovation teacher changing over the past decade. Would you be able to share your thought on that?
To be honest, I think that I can't tell you why this sort of learning mode comes to me. I think that there are entrepreneurial characteristics that maybe describe that. There's always sort of a mixture of humility and arrogance too, right? And the humility is that, man, I don't know everything. And I'm telling you straight up, I do not. There's a lot I don't know. But it also means that I go into my life every day willing to learn. And so that's the humility part of it. And I guess there's the flip side, which is, it's confidence bordering on arrogance, perhaps is a better way of putting it. But other people, I guess, would probably call me straight up arrogant. But we're the ones to do it. I mean, I truly believe we're thought leaders out there, and that we've got to take that other people don't have. It doesn't mean nobody's had it. There's definitely other people that got it too. That's one of the things that you learn, I guess. Back to the humility side really quickly is there's no new ideas under the sun. There's other people that have these ideas and they're out there doing them as well. But I guess I think that fundamentally, I'm confident that we're the right ones to do it, and I'm always in learning mode. And so those are, I need to keep that balance myself in order to keep us moving forward.
Yeah, and actually, that's a beautiful transition to my next question. Referring back to your TED Talk in 2013, you talked about how the world needs more visionaries, or these people that relentlessly pursue change. Right now, do you feel like we're currently at a stage where you will find these visionaries everywhere, or are we stuck with the visionary myth, as you call it?
Wow, that's a great question. I think we'll continue to have the both. So I think that the myth of the visionary is a storytelling thing. I think it's kind of too bad in some sense, but human beings are storytellers, and we love legends and we love myths. And so, we love to look at what's happened in the past and come up with these stories. And if these stories are used to inspire people to go into the future, that's amazing. And I think that there's a lot of value to that. I think that the downside is that if people take these stories too literal, in other words, Steve Jobs truly was a visionary and could predict the future, I think that sets the wrong tone, right? That maybe gives you the arrogance, but not the learning mode, not the self-awareness to know that you actually can't predict the future and that you don't know and that you have to go into learning mode. So I think that the strength of the visionary is, hey, I do want to change the world. The strength of the visionary is also, I don't necessarily know how I'm going to do it. And frankly, I think Steve Jobs is a great example of that. He made a lot of mistakes. He made a lot of errors. He was wrong multiple times. But if we accept the assumption that his vision was to put a computer in everybody's pocket, holy crap, I think he did it, right? I think he actually achieved that. But he didn't do it with the Lisa, and he didn't do it with the company Next, and he didn't do it with the iPod Shuffle. So it took a lot of iterations in order for him to achieve that. It's not that he foresaw, it's that was the change that he wanted to make. So I think we are entering an era where, sort of the rise of freelance, the rise of the fact that everybody's going to be responsible for their own economy again, which is sort of something that was true, pre-industrial age. I think that there's an opportunity for there to be, 3 billion visionaries if we can teach these people the right way to go about it.
Yeah. So when you're running innovation workshops with different levels of management, what are some of the key differences in motivation, attitude, or behavior that you notice?
Well, so when you're in the lower parts of the organization, there's a lot of anxiety and fear around them, people believing that they're going to get in trouble, that this violates some rules, that violates compliance. They're not allowed to talk to customers this way. They're not allowed to, so there's a lot of fear around whether this is actually going to advance their career, or if they do something wrong, are they going to get fired? I think that when you go onto the opposite side, the up to the management level, there's also a lot of fear, and there's also a lot that these people are getting out of their comfort zone. And I think their fear is that they know that something has to change, but they have no idea how to do it. And so they've become leaders because they're very good at what they've done, which is typically execution mode. They're very successful at managing other people's execution. They're very successful at hitting numbers and all of these leading teams and all of these things that got them to where they are and got their companies to as successful as they are. But now that we're in a new world, they're like, well, heck, I really have no idea what I'm supposed to do in this new world. And so the commonality is that, there's fear on both sides, but the reasons are different.
So there can definitely be resistance from all levels of the organization when it comes to innovation. And in your book, The Lean Entrepreneur, you also talk about the innovation spectrum. So what is that, and how can today's entrepreneur or corporate entrepreneurs leverage that to disrupt markets?
Yeah, so the continuum is, the way I describe it now, it's sort of that idea of the level of uncertainty. And so I think that in the past, maybe I described it as being a level of innovation. And I'm sort of, those things are related, but they're not exactly the same thing. And let me give a quick example. If what you're trying to do is find where your growth is coming from 5 years from now, there's a multiple number of ways that you can do that. You can actually do, breakthrough innovation, where you're trying to invent a new business model or trying to even disrupt your current business model, and it's going to take 5+ years to do that. And that would be on one end of the continuum of breakthrough innovation, and there would also be massive amounts of uncertainty. You could also take an existing product and say, I'm going to go launch it in a developing country. There's really no innovation there, really. But it still might take 5 years for you to get the return on investment launching in a particular emerging economy. But you want to start today, right? You can't wait 3 or 4 years to do it. You have to start today. And so there's still a massive amount of uncertainty there, but there's no innovation. And so I think that's super interesting. And I think it's one of those things that organizations have a really super tough time putting their head around. So the time horizon is the same, but how you're going to get there, there's a whole nother continuum. There's a completely separate access on the type of products or services or marketing or sales or business model or pricing or distribution or all of these other things where there's still a massive amount of uncertainty, but how you're going to accomplish it really doesn't have anything to do with innovation. And so that's part of the challenge, is to get companies to think about their product portfolio and how that they expect that to play out over a time period, and then look at all of these other alternatives: acquisition, investing in startups, tech scouting, modifying existing products to fit into new markets, finding adjacent markets to go into with existing products, adding new products that don't take 5 years into existing markets. Anyway, there's a whole portfolio of ways that you can actually, find new growth. And those need to be on the table, and we need to figure out who's responsible and how you're going to fund it and how you're going to allocate the resources to it over these time horizons. And so I think that we're in an era now where portfolio management, if we call all of that portfolio management, it's a big, big job. And it's not something that can be done really on an annual budget basis. It has to be checked in, and this is sort of the fundamental of Agile. You have to be able to check that into that on how are we doing and what are the metrics we're measuring in order to indicate our progress, and how often are we going to check in on those metrics, and how often are we willing to change those plans based upon what we're learning. So there's I think that there's a lot of uncertainty and turmoil, even in how we're going to grapple with this new world.
Mm-hmm. And I think that with the continuous innovation, or using the emerging and disruptive technologies are going to make it even harder for a lot of companies to make a decision of what direction to go. Because, we're obviously in a very digital age. And I guess my last question before I hand it over to Stuart again is, how can large enterprises as well as startups overcome some of the challenges that follow digital transformation?
Well, I think that basically companies need to stop treating digital transformation as a buzzword, as a catch-all, as a solve-all. Digital transformation should be applied within that portfolio management that I'm talking about. Where does it make sense to do that? We've done these workshops, for example, back when Lemonade, the insurance startup, was really popular. We were running these workshops with insurance companies, and our process has people going through defining the customer, defining the problem, understanding it deeply, going out and talking to customers and making sure that you've got your persona correct and you've described the problem right. And no matter how much we did that work, when we got to solution mode, the solution was always, peer-to-peer insurance. And we're like, no, that's not a solution to a problem. That's a technology. What is your product? Peer-to-peer insurance. And so, companies get stuck on this stuff. They get stuck on, blockchain, Internet of Things. No, those aren't solutions. Those are technologies. So I think digital transformation is the same thing. People need to stop running around and going like, we need to do digital transformation. It's not the same thing as what I'm talking about. Digital transformation has a role to play in there somewhere. But you really need to go and assess the opportunities and understand your customers and run these experiments to even determine whether digitization is the right strategy for a particular time horizon and growth objective that you're trying to achieve. When it comes to startups, I guess I would say the same thing, though it's hard to imagine startups that don't have some sort of digital technology nowadays anyways. But people need to not, Stuart, you sort of alluded earlier to Brant, you went right to the solution, which is such a classic thing for an entrepreneur to do. What's worse is to go to a technology first, right? I mean, that's right. Like even worse than going to a solution first. It's hilarious. We get hung up on this technology, and here's a really disruptive company, right? Airbnb. Was there any technology that was actually innovative there? No. Uber, no technology innovation. So people need to stop getting hung up on the buzzwords and the technology and start looking to the customers and the problems that you're trying to solve.
And to me, it's great to see that you have such a passionate response to this, because I recently graduated from Holt International Business School with a degree in Disruptive Innovation. And there was one thing that they just kept pecking into our brains, and that is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Because there are so many examples of companies, entrepreneurs having this technology, and they're just looking for a problem to put this technology or this solution into.
Yeah, I agree totally. I'm glad that they were teaching that to you inside of a disruptive innovation class, because that would seem like that would be ripe for believing in sort of the technology first. So I'm glad they taught it that way.
Yeah, I think that will be it from my side, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. So Brant, I'm super excited about the approaches that you've taken at Moves the Needle that get to this issue of how do you identify the innovation, and then how do you roll it out. So you were there at the beginning of Lean, or the Lean methodology, and I'm really interested in this your particular take on this. What would you say are its greatest strengths as a methodology, and then maybe if you would contrast that to the weaknesses it has?
So I'm going to start with the latter. So in Lean innovation and Lean startup, the problem is the word Lean. So I wasn't around for the beginning of Lean. Lean, goes back to really the Lean manufacturing back in the 50s, and so Eric Ries chose that name Lean and Lean startup, purposely, which I totally dig it. But the problem is that everybody sort of drops the word startup or innovation. and then you get to lean. And the original precepts of lean were around reducing waste. But like if you look at Toyota, they knew the customer, they knew the product, right? They knew the solution. And what they're trying to do is make it more efficient to produce these cars and reduce the waste and increase the value that was being provided to the customer. And so that was all great, and frankly still applies today. In the lean startup world, though, and in lean innovation, you don't really necessarily know what the customer problem solution is. So you actually are trying to reduce the waste in figuring that stuff out. And so there's a fundamental kind of a misunderstanding of lean startup and lean innovation because of people not sort of equating it back to those original lean manufacturing days. And so I think that I think there's like a lot of criticism of lean startup out there, and it tends to not look at the right definition. The people who are criticizing it tend to make up their own definition of what lean startup is, and then sort of knock down a straw man. And so that's kind of too bad. I don't know that. I mean, like we get all the time, oh, that doesn't work for our business model. It doesn't work for hardware. It doesn't work for pharmaceuticals. And if I actually put it to anybody inside of any company in any industry, and I say, well, listen, would you like to reduce the waste in producing new products and services? Well, of course they do. Okay, well then lean startup's right for you. I mean, it's as fundamental as that. And really, neither Steve Blank nor Eric Ries really defined how you actually do it, which I'm very glad about, because that allowed other people like me and Ash Mora and Ben Yoskowitz and just a ton of other people to develop their own methodologies about how you apply these fundamental principles. So I think that there's nothing wrong with the principles. I can't even imagine what the scenario is where somebody would say, yeah, no, waste is okay. So fundamentally, I think that, these things just should be applied. We emphasize, again, not to belabor the point, that if you're faced with uncertainty, you can't really practice lean manufacturing because you don't know. And so that's where our application of lean innovation is helping inside that uncertainty. If you fully know what you need to create, right? There are instances you're building a jet engine. Even if there's a small amount of uncertainty around something, there's 99.9% of that jet engine has to be developed in a particular way. Well, you don't need to do a 2-week sprint in order to, while you're creating a jet engine. You don't need to, run an experiment on how to create that engine. So fundamentally, lean manufacturing is important there. Maybe Lean Six Sigma is important there when there's no uncertainty. And so I think that, people the way I describe it, Stuart, is that if you're building a new jet propulsion system, lean innovation is great because it's uncertain. If you're actually installing a jet engine on a plane, please don't use lean innovation. Use Lean Six Sigma. We know that we got to get it on there right. Lives are at stake. So I think that the strengths are really around the reducing the waste and figuring out how do we provide value to customers. That's the strength of lean innovation. I think that there's a lot of difficulty in understanding your customers the right way these days. I think it's hard to figure out what are the problems that are worth solving that market segments have or that are solvable. We often chase problems that actually are so ingrained in the human being that it's quite possible that those problems aren't solvable. I think that it's easy to get stuck in an experiment mode where you're only running experiments and you never get to the point of actually producing product. And so that's one of the tougher things that we've tried to work through. I also think that fundamentally it's hard for people to scale their learning. So in other words, it's pretty easy to figure out your market segment and go talk to 10 people. And 9 out of 10 might go, give you some evidence that your idea is spot on and you should build it. And you take that to your boss and they're like, we're not going to invest in something that 10 people said they'd like. So how do you scale the numbers in order to convince management that this is the right way to go is really one of the biggest hurdles, I think, in the application of the lean innovation stuff. So I'm not positive I answered your question, but I'll pause there.
A good place to pause. I will say that you answered the question and then gave me a whole bunch of other questions. So let's start with the first thing, which is that one of the arguments I had heard about lean early on, or when I say lean, I mean, like you said, lean startup or lean innovation, was that it had an overemphasis on sustaining innovation. But from what you just said, and from what I've heard from others, it's not as much about sustaining as it is about testing ideas. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think that I've heard that one a lot too, and I think people are just they're just confused. I mean, the fact of the matter is that I don't know what's the number. I'll just throw it out. 99 out of 100 startups are working on something that's super incremental, and
that's awesome, right?
Yeah,
that's just awesome.
Right. Yeah, and so people are just equating that to lean startup instead of equating that to the fact that most entrepreneurs want to build a smartphone app, not a jet propulsion system.
There you go. So why don't we see if you got a perspective on 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. That's a book I read a few years ago that really dug into this idea that we should all be swinging for the fences. Is that something we should be doing?
No. I think that's like fundamental Silicon Valley myth. I think that having lots of people swinging big is great, and I think venture capitalists should be investing heavily in people that are swinging big. That's really what venture capital markets are for. But I really believe the trend in our economy is, sort of this thing that I said earlier, where people are going to return or are returning to being responsible for their own economy. And so to me, that means that if you want to make a small change in the world, well, more power to you. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your community, whatever drives you. But if you want to make a big change in the world, well, that's awesome too. So I don't know. I guess I think it's arrogant for the billionaires to turn around and go like, hey, everybody go swing big. I think people are going to be responsible for their own economy. And so people need to be able to go small or big, depending upon, what are their values? What are their needs? What are they trying to accomplish? And really, I think that it's an empowering way to live, no matter whether you're going big or small.
Yeah, that's fair. Let people make their decision about where they fit on the innovation spectrum, as it were, what they can accomplish, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, in my first book, I alluded to an article where, the writer said something very similar, like, oh, entrepreneurs should stop making, iPhone apps and make, jet propulsion systems. And I'm just sitting there thinking it's not the way things work. People don't sit there and make choices. Oh, am I going to go invent a space rocket or an iPhone app? I mean, it's so absurd that anybody would claim that somebody thinks that way. And, even Thomas Edison, he didn't invent the light bulb. He went and looked at other patents and said, hey, this would be something cool to take to market. And as a matter of fact, that was really the goal of the patent system at the very beginning. It's why it's in our Constitution. It's not so people can hoard patents and run around and claim how many patents that they have, or patent, business processes or these other ridiculous things. The idea is that there are inventors out there. They're not necessarily the ones that take it to market, and other people go into the patent portfolios and go, hey, I'm going to see if I can take this to market. And then they cut a deal with the owner of the patent. We've gotten so far away from that, but man, that's the way Thomas Edison started. He did not have the idea for the light bulb. It already existed.
Yeah, now we've come around to my question about tools, because you just mentioned Edison, and we are in fact sponsored today by Edison 365. So, are there tools that you're thinking about that you use in this process that we should be considering?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of great tools. That's totally ironic. I had forgotten that we had Edison 365 on there. And I'm curious what Edison 365's take is on that. I think obviously the man was brilliant, but what he was brilliant at was running experiments, right? So the light bulb already existed, but it wasn't marketable because nobody had figured out what the right filament was to make it marketable. And so Thomas Edison won that race through thousands of experiments, figuring out what the right material is for the filament to make it marketable. So you fast forward all of these years, these decades, and the lesson that everybody's taking from, the light bulb that goes off over your head is that you have to sit down and build the product, even though it was Thomas Edison that actually ran experiments to figure out what was marketable. And so I love to bring that full circle because that's really what, lean innovation is about, is running the experiments to figure out, hey, should we build this? And what will it take for us to actually be successful? But back to your question about tools. So, I'm a big fan of personas. Personas used to be made up amalgamations of all of these behavior characteristics and demographics, and they never described a real human being. I want people to create personas that describe a real person who really needs your product. And so we have a bunch of free tools on our website, customer product solution Zooms that help entrepreneurs, drill into them, down to what is the right market to focus on, and what's the right functionality in your product in order to solve a real problem. So I think persona tools are great. We have an experiment tool which leads people through how to run a disciplined experiment, because people are very lazy about experiments. They'll run off and they'll do something and then they'll call it an experiment later. We like a disciplined approach, put a stake in the ground. How many people are going to behave in a particular way that indicates that they want the value that you're offering? So it's super important that people don't ask customers to predict their own future. Customers are horrible at predicting their own future. They'll say like buy when they won't really. You can't ask them how much they'll pay. None of that works. So that's why you run experiments, in order to get somebody to behave in a way that indicates that they want something. So there's lots of blog posts and articles on that, on how to run those experiments. A lot of the structure inside of Agile is important. I don't think everybody needs to, go through a full Scrum training or any of this, but, personal Kanban boards I think are awesome. The concept of running a sprint so that you're defining with your team what you're going to accomplish in the next sprint. And I don't really care whether the sprint's, 1 week, 2 weeks, a month. I really don't care. It can be longer depending on what you're building. And the idea is to run the stand-ups to get everybody on board about how they're feeling and what are they working on and what roadblocks they have in front of them. You're running retros in order for people to be able to discuss how things went and improve the performance of the team. You're doing demos to share with each other so people can understand the larger context of what's going on inside of the organization during these demo days. So there's a bunch of Agile tools that I think are important to the process as well. So if that's what you meant by tools, those are the type of tools that I'm a fan of. In terms of digital tools, there's idea tracking, being able to track ideas from inception all the way through whether they achieved, and are there the goals that they wanted, and are there insights that were gleaned along the way, so that even if you have failure, you have these insights that could be shared with the rest of the organization. I'm a big fan of communications tools like Zoom and like Slack. I'm a big fan of Slack, though, that can become almost as unwieldy as some of the other communications tools. But there's a lot of distributed teams out there. My company's a distributed team. So that makes it even a bigger challenge. There's a Techstars company that I've been helping in LA called Parabol that does a remote agile tools for retros that I think is pretty cool, that I've been playing around with. So maybe I'll pause there again, see if I was, on the right track there.
I think you were absolutely on the right track. A number of really interesting points, both on the methodology side and on the digital side, the actual implementations that we we tend to use in our day to day. We've actually done really well in this interview. We've covered a lot of ground, Brent. And it looks like, though, that Dennis might have one more question before I finish up. So, Dennis, why don't you shoot?
Yeah, that's right. So, Brent, I'm a huge sucker for organizational culture. And now I know that there are a lot of innovation teams out there, both old and new, that are sitting inside of an organization that doesn't necessarily take them seriously. So, or that they're resistant to them for whatever reason. What are some concrete steps that they can do to build more trust and excitement about what they're there for?
Yeah, I think you're right on. I think that there are a lot of innovation teams, innovation labs that suffer from that. I think that there's a number of things. They have to be sure that they are shining a light on not only their accomplishments, but everything that they're doing. So it's another reason why I like all of the, the agile stuff and Kanban boards and, our experiment loops and that sort of thing. Put those up in public places so people are asking questions about the work that's being done there. I'm a big fan of Techstars style emails where the startup teams send emails out in the same format every week or every 2 weeks or maybe every once a month. Send them to all the stakeholders, get more and more people to opt into it. And basically you're sharing, here's what we accomplished. Here are our metrics. Here are our big wins. Here are our needs. Here are our obstacles. Here are how you can help, and you kind of put it up in an executive summary, make the email really super concise and send those updates out often. It's amazing to me that innovation teams still get stuck in, these annual review cycles and they haven't shared what they've been working on for the past year. And that's just way too late. That's a good way to get shut down. You have to act like a startup. And I think innovation teams know that when they're approaching the outside world, i.e. their customers, but they forget that they need to act that way to their internal stakeholders. They're still a startup. They have to go do empathy for their internal stakeholders. They're not getting attention because their leaders are suffering from trying to accomplish, their near-term goals. So if I'm in an internal innovation team, I'm going to go to leadership. I'm going to go to a business unit leader, and I'm going to understand that business unit leader deeply. I'm going to do some empathy. I'm going to understand where they come from. What's their background? What keeps them up at night? What are the problems that they're trying to solve for? And then maybe what I'm going to do is say, listen, I can help you solve some of those near-term problems using my innovation methods. And if I do, I want you to back our efforts in some of this longer-term stuff.
Exactly. So what I'm hearing is, be empathic, be clear and active and loud and transparent in the way that you communicate your idea, your work throughout organizations and to all the stakeholders in the project.
Yep.
Thank you very much for that.
Sure. Eat your own dog food. That's the bottom line, right? So it's hard. It doesn't taste very good. So, yeah.
Well, maybe you have to tell them to drink their own champagne.
I know. See, I was joking about that with my team the other day. That people act like that's the same phrase, but of course everybody wants to drink their own champagne. What's negative about that? Eating your own dog food means you gotta put up with all of the stuff that's hard. There's nothing hard about drinking champagne.
There you go. You gotta put up with what's hard. But the beautiful thing about this process that you're sharing with us is that the method lends itself to regular results. And if you have regular results, there's no reason not to just share them at the time they're available.
That's right.
And in a way, with innovation, one of the things that's really different about it is that you have to be more open. If you have a strategic plan and you're going to go charge the hill, sometimes, you want to be really kind of quiet and you might want to protect your strategy so it doesn't get disrupted. But the reality is that in the process of understanding, your next step, you really have to be open. And that's, I think, probably one of the hardest things for a larger company to figure out.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that if you're actually tasked with doing breakthrough innovation that is going to compete against your existing business model, I am a fan for hiding that startup way out remote somewhere, because that can wreak havoc. But to be honest, most companies that are running these innovation labs aren't really doing that stuff that's really super disruptive or breakthrough. A matter of fact, one of the biggest challenges with the labs is that they're sort of given that challenge, but again, their budgets are reviewed on an annual basis. And you're just not going to demonstrate return on investment if what you're trying to do is develop something that's 5 or 6 or 7 years down the road. So that's sort of the modern innovator's dilemma.
Yeah, there you go. For another day, though, because we have really used quite a bit of time on this one, but I still have room for you to answer your own question. So, is there anything that we have not answered that we haven't asked that you really want to answer today?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it was a great conversation. I guess how people can get a hold of me. I'm at Brant Cooper on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, and I'm happy if people want to send me an email, brant@brantcooper.com. The website is movestheneedle.com, and we've been doing our own podcast. We have articles out there and case studies, and also the free tools that I mentioned, and people are welcome to come and download the tools that we do have up there.
Very good. Thank you very much, Brant. This has been a great pleasure today.
Truly.
Thank you. I had a good time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Edison 365 podcast. We certainly enjoyed the conversation and hope that you're left with more knowledge of the innovation space. We have more exciting guests coming up, so make sure to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your network. Also, if there's anyone you'd like for us to interview next, make sure to leave that in a comment or send us an email to the email address in the description. Thanks again to our guest, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.